So we're going to give you Joe, but Joe has got a slightly dubious internet connection and a cold. So if he starts to sound like a Dalek, it's either him or it's the internet. And then you're just going to be left with Sam and I. As for Caroline, who's got 3 kids, as you know, it literally is the start of school. And Alex is on holiday.
Yeah, it's going to be a bumpy ride today, I'm afraid. But if things don't hang together, then Laura and Sam will step in. Anyway, thanks for joining, everyone. I think all of you can hear me at the moment. Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
We'll see how we get on. So just what we're going to be discussing today, we're going to get a quick sort of recap and update because it's a little while since we all met. Then we're going to go through basically the sort of updated strategy of the Labour for a New Democracy campaign and what we sort of see as the priorities in the run-up to the next general election. Then we're going to talk a bit specifically about conference in a little under a month's time and basically what everyone can do to get involved with sport, and then have a discussion and answer any questions you have. Am I still with you?
Yeah, but I think you should take your as we know what you look like now after 2.5 years of looking at you. I think you can take your picture off, so we might hear you better.
Okay, and on that note, I'm going to hand over to you, Laura. So take it away.
Great. Are you going to also put up some of your typically marvelous slides at some point?
Yeah.
So the recap is all very positive. Most of you have been with us since the start, if not pre-start. I can see at least Ken from the Labour Campaign for Electoral Reform and others who've been campaigning on this for a very, very long time. But we're going into this new year in good shape. I suppose the 2 big highlights of the last few months have been last year's conference vote and then the discussion that we had at the National Policy Forum. There is the conference vote. Some of you were there. And if you've not seen the video, we will send it to you again. That, I think, marked a real turning point for the campaign in Labour, sort of solidifying the membership support, but also obviously buoyed up by the trade unions. As you know, 2/3 of affiliated trade unions have policy in favour of electoral reform. And that very much provided the backdrop to the discussions that we then had in the National Policy Forum, which we discussed last time. Some of you might not have been with us. We can pick up in questions again at the end if you would like. But essentially, we made quite a step forward by securing language in the party's policy programme, criticising the current electoral system. And we are assuming that that policy programme in its entirety is going to be voted through at conference this year. I don't know, Joe, if anywhere in your slides you have the wording. If not, there you are. The flaws in the current voting system are contributing to distrust and alienation we see in politics. That's obviously not the "and we will introduce PR in the first term of a Labour government" that we would all like to have, but it is definitely a really, really strong foundation upon which to go into conference this year and then all the discussions through to the general election and beyond. So we're starting in pretty good shape. We'll give you a little bit of a whistle-stop tour through what we think the strategy is, and then very much welcome thoughts, comments, observations, omissions, and we'll be discussing this again with the Labour for New Democracy Coalition Steering Group. This year marks a bit of a pivot point, as media folk say. We've spent the last 2 years really demonstrating how solid the base of support is in the Labour Party. Our theory of change was always that we would build from the bottom. So previous campaigns have come a cropper because they've put the Parliamentary Labour Party as the first hurdle to cross. And we decided, as you'll know, many of you have been part of this, that we will build power up from the bottom. So all that brilliant work that you did with the CLP motions, we now have over 400 CLPs have policy in favour of PR. As far as we are aware, there is no other single policy issue which has got such huge support across the party. Again, as you know, because many of you have led these debates yourself, in I think 96% of CLPs where PR is discussed, the policy motion is then passed. So that, the story of 2021 was to build the power of the Labour membership. And then in 2022, we sort of layered into this further trade union support. We have always said that there will then come a point at which we need to shift our focus slightly. So what we're going to talk about now in the strategy is how that happens. Now, obviously, we want to continue building CLP support. We don't need to stop at 400. We can carry on going to 650. That might be slightly ambitious, as a few of those 650 probably very, very rarely meet. But obviously, there is no reason for us to stop that. And Labour Campaign for Electoral Reform is going to be giving another push after conference to the speaker tour. So if you are in a CLP that still hasn't passed a policy, please let us know. LCR can provide excellent speakers. If you yourself are a great speaker, then we can maybe give you some briefing. So we will continue with that work, but we no longer have the same kind of very, very clear target that our campaign perhaps had, because we've built the CLP support and we've obviously won the conference motion, and we've made this step forward in the National Policy Forum. So our targets now become slightly more diffuse. So we'll perhaps just whistle you through those, and Joe, maybe your slides will help remind me the order I'm supposed to be talking in. So the first one is the CLPs. If you are in a CLP which hasn't got policy, then please let us know. Oh, yeah, good point. Vision and aim. Thanks, Joe. The overall vision, change British politics. The aim. This is seamless, as you can tell. Transform the policy that we created at the National Policy Forum into action by the next Labour government. And how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to carry on amplifying that criticism that's in the National Policy Forum statement in the run-up to the general election, and use that to challenge and encourage the Labour Party to respond by taking action in government. So that's the big picture. So the first objective is consolidate and grow the support amongst the CLPs. We will be talking a little bit at conference, and then in our first meeting after conference, about the boundary changes. It will not have escaped your attention that many of your CLPs, many of your CLPs won't change at all. Some of you will be having small numbers of people coming in effectively from other CLPs, and some of you will find yourselves in sort of almost new CLPs. So we have got another piece of work which we'll do after conference to carry on building support with a special focus on new CLPs. That is something that we're going to come to after Liverpool and in our first meeting after conference. Our second objective is to continue to build support in the trade unions. As you will remember from our discussions about the National Policy Forum, we still have one major trade union which is very determinedly against PR. If you're in the GMB, please let us know. We haven't given up on the idea that over time we may help the GMB change its position. And in the meantime, we want to continue to do work to educate and encourage trade union members in all of our affiliated trade unions. And by the way, some of the non-Labour campaigns are working as well with the non-Labour affiliated trade unions. Obviously, some of the biggies like the National Education Union, because the more support, the merrier, really. But our focus is very much Labour's affiliated trade unions. So we will continue to have discussions with them, not least as they will continue to play a part in the shaping of Labour's policy up to and through the general election. And then our third objective, Joe's about to remind me, are the senior stakeholders in the party. Those include the people who will be shaping Labour's manifesto. You'll know who many of those people are, prominent members of the shadow cabinet, and you won't know who some of them are, and you probably wouldn't recognise them if they walked into your living room, but there are a small number of key advisors, particularly the advisor to the Leader of the Opposition and the Lotto team. There are obviously other parliamentarians who have senior roles, like Shabana Mahmood, for example, who was the National Campaign Coordinator, who has been promoted into the shadow cabinet. She clearly is a trusted confidant of the Leader of the party. And then there are people from trade unions and people who are sort of prominent activists from some of the tendencies in the party. And we will focus increasing amounts of effort in helping them and their understanding about PR and how it could work. Some of the questions that come to us when we're talking to sort of senior stakeholders in the party are often about, how could it literally happen? That's very much the discussion we'll also be having with the Parliamentary Labour Party more broadly. So we're working with, I'm going to answer, there's a great question, Sue Lloyd, about the shadow cabinet, which I will answer in 2 ticks. So the Parliamentary Labour Party in some ways become less important over the next 12 months and then very important after the election. And we are also working with the people who we think will be the new Parliamentary Labour Party. As you know, Sam in particular and Alex have been doing work identifying prospective parliamentary candidates, trying to encourage CLPs to engage in the debates about the selection of prospective parliamentary candidates, and then finding out what those PPCs think. If you are in a CLP which has not yet selected your PPC, please can you make contact with Sam, because it's really helpful for us to have intel from local activists about what is happening in your CLP. If you know your PPC and you think they're a bit shy, that's another great question, Barry Edwards. I will also try to answer in a minute. If you know your PPC and you think they're a bit PR shy, then ask them for a meeting. We've got briefing that we can give you, which you can share with them, that we can share with them directly. We're very much trying to make friends with as many PPCs as we can. Now, as we've discussed previously, most of them are going to keep their heads down. Apart from the fact that their singular focus is going to be getting elected, they're unlikely probably to sort of depart in a very kind of fireworks way from the main focus of party policy. But we want to encourage as many of them as possible, even if it's just quietly and privately, to come with us in the next part of the campaign after the election. So please let us know if you know any of them. Before the 5th objective, I'm just going to answer those 2 questions. So the shadow cabinet, it's obviously incredibly important to the people in the shadow cabinet, whether they're in it or out of it. And the media gets very excited. From a PR perspective, really very little has changed. In fact, sort of looking at the overall numbers, nothing really has changed. So the shadow cabinet is more or less reflective of the Parliamentary Labour Party in terms of its views about PR. Actually, it's slightly more pro. So we have fewer members of the shadow cabinet are on record as being pro first past the post. It's about 18% of them. So obviously not very many people. Whereas in the Parliamentary Labour Party as a whole, it's just over a fifth. It's about 21%. There are a few undeclared people in the shadow cabinet than there are in the PLP as a whole. But again, we don't expect most of them to make this the major thing that they talk about over coming weeks and months. They're going to stick to script on fiscal responsibility, the cost of living crisis, and governing the country better than the Tories. So broadly speaking, not much has really changed. It certainly would be a massive stretch to suggest that, in fact, people's views on PR have really played any part in their promotion or demotion or their sideways moves. I don't think we can draw that conclusion at all. There is some great news about Flo Eshalomi. Some of you may know her. She was, in fact, my MP for a while. She's a very lovely woman and she is pro-PR. And no, we don't have a detail yet on how she is going to approach this role. In fact, Alex is meeting her next week and I'm meeting her in a couple of weeks. We do understand, and this was clear from the MPF, that votes at 16 and ID cards are going to be 2 important issues for the party. And I think we can assume that those are going to be priorities for her. But we're going to be speaking to her over the next couple of weeks. So actually, on balance, I would say if anything has shifted, it's probably shifted ever so slightly in our direction. To the next question about the volume of support for PR and the PLP. We do volunteer percentages. What we don't do is shove them all over our website and necessarily put them all over Twitter, because it's not that we don't want to advertise the PLP who are pro-PR, but we don't want to advertise the PLP who are against, partly because we don't want to sort of trap people in a position which they may be shifting out of. We have a number of people, including in the shadow cabinet, there are about 3, who are sort of against. They used to be pro the current system to the extent they had a view. They're now moving through this space where they've decided they're against first past the post, but they've not yet decided that they like PR. They're in a sort of anti-chamber. We believe that that's a trend that's going to continue. But broadly speaking, with the PLP, you've got 1/5 of them are pro the current system, first past the post. You've got about 35% of them on the record as pro PR, and the rest are undeclared. And the undeclareds fall into 2 camps. There are the people who literally do not tell you. So you can doorstep them at a meeting, you can write them a letter, you can bump into them in ladies' toilets, you're not going to get an answer. And there are the other people who give quite caveated answers. So they can see the weaknesses in the current system, but they like its simplicity. They can see the weaknesses in the current system, but they're not convinced about it being a priority to move. You know, we get all sorts of on the one hand, on the other answers. But broadly speaking, there's only 20% have ever come out for first past the post. So we can come back to further questions, but that's where we are. And the final of our objectives, and this is perhaps not so much for all of you as for many of your friends, neighbours and family who might not be in the Labour Party but are pro PR. We really want to see, and we will try to help to the extent that we are able, extended and expanded external campaigning for PR. And I think that we, by which I mean all of you on this call, and all of those in the Labour for New Democracy coalition, we have really done an amazing job over the last 2.5 years to move the Labour Party and the trade union movement within that. We now need to see greater external demand from the outside world as well. So if you do have friends, family, neighbours who are interested in PR, aren't in the Labour Party, please encourage them to check out Make Votes Matter, encourage them to check out Unlock Democracy. And if you've got any spare time when you finish doing your land work, then, send letters to your local press, whatever we can do to illustrate that this is an issue that the general public care about. All of the latest polling suggests that they do. There are now more people want to have change to the electoral system for the House of Commons than there are for the House of Lords. That was proven by Labour Together's polling just before the summer. And that's going to be an increasingly important part of the sort of broader campaign. And obviously land will give its guidance and support where we can, and in particular try to encourage our allies and other organisations to use messaging which we know can also appeal to the Labour Party. So that's what we think we're going to be about for the next, for the foreseeable. I don't know if you've any questions on any of that, or if you want us to just rattle on and do questions at the end. I'm looking at you, Sam. Shall I rattle on?
I think we should keep going because people have questions that we will answer in the next few minutes.
Super. So Sam or Joe, if you're still there, Joe, do one of you two want to talk about the conference plan?
Yeah, I'll see how I get on internet-wise, if you can hear me. Okay. So, in that context, we have conference coming up shortly in Liverpool. Now, the principles, as Laura's said, it's a slightly different sort of campaign from now on, more broadly speaking. It's not the sort of series of discrete kind of mechanical policy motions going forward, passed or not passed, at union conferences and Labour conferences. It's sort of more of an ongoing effort to influence Labour in government once Labour gets into government, and ensure it delivers electoral reform. And so in keeping with that, when we're thinking about conference, firstly, we need to continue building on the significant progress that we've made over the last couple of years. What we definitely don't want to do is anything that takes us backwards, or anything that sort of it stops our momentum. We don't want anything that can sort of look like we've gone back and done the same thing again, but this time haven't got the impact that we did last time at conference. Secondly, as I mentioned, we need to make sure we're trying to influence and focus on what the agenda is for Labour in government. That's really our overall aim at the moment. So for conference, I mean, we want to use all the opportunities that conference provides, both on the conference floor, in the conference hall, also, you know, at conference more broadly, at the fringe and so on, to really encourage Labour and challenge Labour constructively to address the issues that it's identified with first past the post. And in order to do that, we're going to be doing quite a few things. We're going to be intervening from the conference floor, using a delegate network like in previous years. We'll be intervening at fringe events. We'll be holding our own high-profile fringe events. We'll have, again, a very visible and vibrant kind of brand and presence at conference, and we'll hopefully be getting some media coverage, amplifying all of this. There's a few things that we are basically not recommending this year. Firstly, conference motions. We have won, the support of conference last year outright by an overwhelming majority for proportional representation. We then, gone to the National Policy Forum, and there we've secured not a policy that's as sort of wholehearted and as unequivocal as that, but a criticism of first past the post, which is endorsed by the entire party, representatives of all of the trade unions, including those who themselves support first past the post, and all of the PLP, including those who support first past the post. We've got to build on that, and we've got to build on our conference win last year. We don't do that by going back and having the same debate that we had last year, putting all the sort of resources into doing that it requires, and either winning again but not taking a step forward, just proving what we already proved last year, or worse still, having a debate and somehow not getting a good result out of it. That is going backwards, and that's what we want to avoid. Getting into the weeds a bit more. During conference, you can do something called a reference back. We're going to give full briefings on how conference works and what our specific interventions are going to be. So don't worry if this isn't all familiar to you. But a reference back is basically when a delegate at conference can say there's something in the reports the conference debates and votes on that needs to be looked at again by the National Policy Forum. Now, there's no point in us doing that this year. We've sort of gone through this process culminating in the National Policy Forum meeting in July, and got this sort of consensus that there's a problem with first past the post. It's not going to move us forward again if we sort of refer that back, or we try to refer that back and say this isn't complete. We we'll have other means for intervening and making our point. But the thing is, if we move a reference back and have a vote on it and win, it doesn't actually change anything. It sort of says, well, conference thinks this needs to be looked at, but the National Policy Forum won't change the wording. The documents will be the same. It doesn't take us any further forward. However, it's perfectly possible that if you move a reference back, it's not the same as voting on the policy itself, and that reference back could easily fall. And then it doesn't look like a show of strength if you move this sort of technical procedure and it falls. So there's no good outcome to moving one. It's not something we want to get into. Same goes with points of order, unless they're genuinely necessary. If there's something very dodgy going on, I'm sure there won't be, then of course a point of order is necessary. But we don't want to be using sort of points of order to try and make a point about PR where it's not a legitimate sort of use of a point of order. It's just going to irritate people. And the same thing, I think, of making tenuous links to PR in other debates. We will have opportunities to raise PR in debates. There's going to be a debate on the relevant section of the National Policy Forum, which includes all of the democratic reform policy. During that, delegates will be encouraging delegates to get up and say their piece. There might be one or two other areas which are really closely linked to PR, but they need to be very closely linked. We don't want to get up and say something that's really, not obviously linked in most people's minds, because it just will, make us look a little bit too too obsessed about electoral reform when we should be thinking about wider issues and making space around. Okay, our overarching message is basically a positive message that we need a Labour government in order to address exactly the distrust and alienation that Labour has identified with first past the post. And in terms of organising for conference, I mean, we're going to be in touch with all of you in one means or another, basically trying to get you to reach out to your conference delegates. If you are a delegate, then you can sign up directly. If you're not, then you can invite your CLP's delegates to sign up with our network. If you're going to be at conference but you're not a delegate, then you can volunteer with us. And we're going to need a big team of volunteers again, doing running our whole operation, from leafleting to organising fringes to everything you can think of. We're going to have those pre-briefing sessions for delegates and volunteers. I think we'll do them jointly this year because we don't have the sort of very separate business of emotion on the conference floor and volunteers separately. I think we'll bring it all together, and we're going to run 2 separate sessions, which will be a repeat. So just show up for one if you're coming to conference. We'll send invites to those to you as well. And yeah, we're going to have our WhatsApp group or several WhatsApp groups of delegates and volunteers at conference again. We'll have a briefing venue in Liverpool, the same one as last year if you were there. And we'll do at least sort of first day and I think second day briefings, and possibly more throughout conference as we go. So that's sort of the overall plan. Very different kind of game from last year, but just as important. Just before we get on to the discussion and Q&A, I'm just going to do a quick summary of what you can do. And this is both at conference. I mean, so say, get involved as a delegate, get involved as a volunteer. But beyond that, everyone can join LCR, Labour Campaign for Electoral Reform, which is the host of Labour for a New Democracy. And if you join LCR, that's the best way to sort of make a direct financial contribution to the campaign PR within Labour. You can join from sort of any sort of membership that you choose, basically. We'll send a link out for that as well.
If you want to join LCR right now, if you want to join LCR right now, look in the chat. There is a link.
Excellent. In your CLP region, make sure your CLP has passed a motion. We'll be in touch about all of this. You don't have to just go away and sort of remember it and do it yourself. Lobby and let us know about the position of your local MP and PPC. We've got regional land WhatsApp groups for every region. There's also, in a growing number of regions, LCR regional groups which do a bit more sort of involved on the ground organising. In your trade union, we're going to be reaching out to sort of people based on which union they're a member of, because there's very different jobs we got to do in different trade unions, and a smaller and smaller number of trade unions where something that just needs to change from the point of view of the PR campaign. So make sure your union affiliation is up to date. You can do that on any form on our website, and we'll be in touch if it's one we need to talk to members about, basically. And yeah, this is the other thing. We're hoping to basically start getting out as Labour members, doing a bit of canvassing as Labour for PR. That's sort of something we're going to be thinking about after conference. But very much a kind of next step and the next front in this campaign. So keep an eye out for that. And we'll be holding online events throughout the end of the year and early next year as we work towards the next general election.